Hi, I'm David Sill, Senior Vice President of Customer Success at DiscoverOrg, and in today's Whiteboard Wednesday session, I'm going to make the case for the power of storytelling in account-based sales and marketing. Much has been said to this point about the wisdom of using storytelling in a business context. And I think that that's because it's a very natural concept for us all to latch onto. If we think about our personal lives, who doesn't love going to see a great movie or binge watching a television series or getting yourself lost in a book? We know that stories are powerful. We know that that's how we learn. That's how we pass things along from generation to generation or from culture to culture. So it's a real easy context for us to say, yes, stories are powerful. And in the business context, there is significant findings that say why it's smart to employ stories there as well. People in a business context, just like in your personal life, you make a decision primarily based on emotion, and then you double back after that to kind of back it up with logic or rationality. And so the prize often doesn't go to the person that is the low-cost provider. It goes to the person that does a better job of casting a vision that your target account or your prospects can latch onto, and one that they are going to share as a story across departments and across functions. And that's kind of the point with account-based initiatives, because at their root, that's about coordinating and personalizing a message in a target named account across multiple stakeholders. So you need the story to do the work when you're not there. You know, Corporate Executive Board did research, continues to do research that says that the number of stakeholders involved in a business-to-business buying cycle continues to go up. First it was 5.4, more recently it's 6.7. So you realize that you're not going to be there for all those meetings, and so you need a story to be told and retold on the prospect side when you're not around. So again, it's very easy to latch onto the idea that story is emotional transportation. It's the part that somebody takes with them and retells. And yet the quandary is that, in my experience, if you run a sales team, if you run a customer success team, you don't often hear folks on the phone. If you're reviewing conversations, nobody's really telling stories. And so why is that? Well, at DiscoverOrg, we had our sales kickoff not long ago, and we decided to tackle that. I remembered a great book that I had read in the past called Measures of Story by Sean Buvala, and I hope I'm saying his last name right. But the great thing about this book was that it took the components of story and it broke it down into 3 component parts that can be followed as a process, and I'd like to share that with you now. So at the base level is something called a float. And a float, think of a float as nothing more than it's a statistic. It's a finding. It's something that might be interesting to hear, but that's all that it is. You don't give me anything with a float that tells me how you'd like me to think about that as a prospect. You don't guide my perspective at all. One level up from a float then is an anecdote. And we're all familiar with the idea of an anecdote, but in this context, an anecdote is better than a float because it adds an element of context. Maybe it adds an opinion, but in other words, you're guiding me as a prospect in terms of how do you want me to think about this thing? How do you want this positioned in my mind? And then one level up from that is the actual complete story. And the defining characteristic of a story is that there's a beginning, and there's a middle, and there's an end. Okay? So let's work with this in the context of account-based sales and marketing. And we'll work an example, but let's pretend that my stakeholders include a VP of sales and a manager of sales, and we'll say a quota-carrying AE. If I were to give a float example, it might sound something like this. 2/3 of a sales rep's day is spent in non-selling activities, researching, calling around, trying to kind of figure out details on an account. Okay. In and of itself, once again, That might be interesting to hear, but I sure don't know how you want me to think about that. The anecdote version of that same float might sound something like, 2/3 of a sales rep's day is spent engaged in non-selling activities, and if you're a team that is primarily focused on booking more meetings, creating more pipeline, and closing more deals, nothing is going to be more frustrating to your team than burning cycles working with bad data. So you see there that unlike the float, I give you that statistic, but then I also throw in a little bit of point of view around that statistic so that you know how to think about it. The story version of that same idea might be something like, 2/3 of a sales rep's day is spent engaged in non-selling activities. And if you're a team that is primarily focused on adding pipeline, booking meetings, and closing deals, nothing is going to be more frustrating to your team than burning cycles dealing with bad data all day long. I ran an inside sales team, and we had about 30 people on that inside sales team. And if I wasn't careful, I could fool myself into thinking that my team was being very productive and moving cycles forward all day long, every day. I would walk the floor, and the sales floor was always kind of busy, people typing in notes. Some people had headsets on, some people were online, and it was the appearance on the surface level that everybody was being productive. But I came to learn the hard way that it was a silent killer in at least two ways, the difference between working hard and working smart, because every minute that those sales reps on the sales floor were kind of floundering around, dealing with bad data, working with bad data, that's a minute that wasn't spent opening an opportunity, getting a meeting with the decision maker, moving that sales cycle forward, learning about a buying process. So it was a silent killer in terms of the opportunity cost involved. It was also a silent killer in terms of the morale hit, because at that time in my management career, I had a team of folks that, unbeknownst to me, they didn't believe in the data that was in our CRM. Everybody kind of figured, oh, it's all junk, the numbers are bad, the information is old and stale, and basically everybody thought that our database was a joke. And therefore, they were walking around with all this head trash. They were essentially defeated in their own mind before they ever even gave a fair chance at getting somebody on the phone, getting somebody into a meeting, and moving the sales cycle forward. So trust me when I tell you, if you have folks that are spending a good bit of their day floundering around with bad data, that's killing you in more ways than one, and that's a lesson that I had to learn firsthand. Okay, so stepping out of the role play, that's the story example. And the difference between merely offering the anecdote and offering the story is that now I've not only given you kind of some perspective on how I want you to think about this thing, but I've also given you the ability to emotionally connect. Maybe you're on the other side saying, yeah, you know what? That very same thing could be happening to me, and now that I've seen this movie, I better make sure that that's not what's going on in my environment. So that's the difference between a float, an anecdote, and a story. And now let's not forget, you need to apply that differently, especially in an account-based approach, because you're going to be dealing with multiple stakeholders. In our example, these are multiple stakeholders all from sales, but it could just as easily be an example where you have a head of sales, you have a head of marketing, you have somebody from sales operations. But the important thing here is, even though this story is the same story, you're going to finesse it, you're going to massage it in the direction of the personas that you're selling to. So if I'm taking this story and I'm positioning it with the vice president of sales, I want to be talking kind of more at that macro level, because I know that a VP of sales is going to be thinking about hitting the number for the month, hitting the number for the quarter. How can I get more work done with less resources? Or how can I get more work done without having to go out and add a bunch of headcount? That's how I would frame that thing up talking to a VP of sales. A manager of sales, let's just say in this example that it's a new up-and-coming leader in the company. Well, that person, based on their persona, they might be more concerned with me telling that story in a way that shows, hey, this is going to be a home run with your team. Everybody's going to be high-fiving you because you're giving them the resource that helps them put more money in their wallet, in their paycheck. And so I would frame that story differently, aiming it at the manager of sales. And then, to round out the example, an AE, well, that's somebody that's a quota-carrying contributor. And so you just want to let that person know that all that bad data just gets in the way of the money that they can make this month in their commission check. And so what's the two big walkways from today? Number one, don't forget to finish your story. Don't just throw stats around. back it up with the full version, beginning, middle, and end, so people can emotionally connect with what you're saying. And number two, don't forget that in an account-based approach, you need to massage that message based on the different personas that you're interfacing with. Hope this helped. If you like the content of today's video, share it, comment below, and subscribe to our channel.